It is so much bigger than all of that. I mean, social media was just a tool that was built on top of the web that allowed people to easily create and share content with one another. It was built on top of an existing platform. Mobile basically gave you a new modality that was much more convenient, essentially to access the digital world and digital information. This innovation makes us question what it means to be human. It is a completely different realm.
This is AI First with Adam and Andy, the show that takes you to the front lines of AI innovation in business. I'm Andy Sack, and alongside my co host, Adam Brotman, each episode we bring you candid conversations with business leaders transforming their businesses with AI. No fluff, just real talk and actionable insights. Welcome, Matt, founder and CEO of Suzy, featured in our book AI First. Glad to see you again, Matt.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited about this.
Today we're gonna cover Matt's story, his own personal transformation as it relates to AI, the story of what he's done at Suzy, which Adam and I found nothing short of incredible. He was just an early leader. And lastly, we can talk about Matt's upcoming book. Adam, welcome. Good to see you again, as always.
Yeah, this will be a fun episode. Exciting to have Matt on. I mean, we're one of the best case studies in our book, so this will be great.
So Matt, let's just start. Introduce people to your company, Suzy, and your background. Just brief overview of the company and your background.
Yeah, so I've spent my career helping brands essentially decode what's next and what it means for their business. I entered the workforce in the early 2000s at the dawn of the age of the internet. And back then it was about helping brands understand how to reach young people on the internet. I was fortunate enough to be targeting college students for a lot of brands when Facebook came into the scene in 2004, 2005. And at that point, it was about helping them understand social media. Over time, it would become iPhone and mobile. And today it's about AI. So throughout my career, I've been fortunate enough to have a front seat to all these changes. And at the earlier stages of my career, it was about helping them not just understand what's happening, but activate. And I ran an ad agency in that regard that was called MRY, and that was acquired back in 2014. My next phase of my career is really helping companies dig deeper into the consumer and uncover insights that can help drive broader strategies. And with that, I founded the company in 2018 called Suzy, which is a market research software platform that's used by over 500 leading enterprise brands to basically put the voice of the consumer in every decision they're making. Because with each of these changes, what often happens is brands sort of don't act quickly enough to change and evolve their model, and they're left on the outside looking in. But if you have the voice of the consumer, the people who are driving these changes, at your fingertips to make decisions, often you can future-proof yourself, so to speak.
And so can you describe your first holy shit moment? And I think that's the technical term that I've used with AI. When did you have your first holy shit moment with AI?
Yeah, so being a software company, we have a sizable engineering team. And when ChatGPT first came out and it became apparent that this was the wave had arrived, so to speak. And I kind of always knew we'd be at this place, which is why I called my company Suzy. I sort of always knew that we'd be talking to our technology like people. I just didn't know how and when it would come about. And lo and behold, it came about in 2023 when ChatGPT became widely accessible. And my first inclination as a software company was give AI to our engineering team to figure out. And after about 6 months of nothing really happening, it kind of dawned on me that this was my problem to solve, because AI, unlike other technological innovations in the past, was in a whole different realm. It kind of redefined what it meant to create technical products and redefined it what was actually possible. So I took it into my own hands to try to figure out what can really be done. The first step I did was actually not in business. It was actually for myself personally. So I just turned 50 this year. I have 2 small children. One of the biggest problems I have in my life is I want to stay alive as long as possible. And I made the decision that before I was going to use AI to solve any business problems, I was going to see how it can help me solve a glaring personal problem or challenge, which was how do I, ensure that I'm around to see my kids grow up. So I decided to create my own custom GPT. At that point, OpenAI had given consumers and users the ability to create their own GPT based upon their own data. And with that, I went through 15 years of personal health data, MRIs, X-rays, blood tests, notes from doctors, et cetera. And I created my own personal health bot with the purpose of keep me alive. And I started to ask the questions like, if I were to die in 5 or 10 years, what's the most likely cause? My holy shit moment was when I started to get those answers. And obviously, unlike a doctor who might not want to scare you, AI doesn't care about scaring you. It just cares about giving you the best possible answer at that moment. And of course, I started to dig deeper. But really what dawned on me at that moment is up until then, if people had an ailment or a symptom, they would go to WebMD and go in kind of this doom spiral. And WebMD doesn't know anything about the person. But this chat bot knew everything about me. Anything that existed about me, it knew. And his answers were so kind of prescient and so precise and so actionable and insightful. Then like my mind turned on like, okay, well, what's the blood test and MRI and X-ray data for my business? And how could it help my business stay alive? And that sort of is what started me on the journey. And I think the learning lesson there is try to use AI to solve a personal problem, because that's something that you're going to be much more vested in than even business. In this case, it wasn't a problem, so to speak. It was just more of like a goal or a mission. And you're so much more passionate about that you can cover a lot.
Matt, just so I understand, you created a custom GPT, which for readers, it's within ChatGPT. It's was an early feature that OpenAI released, but you created one for longevity purposes and uploaded a bunch of test results. Is that what you did?
Test results, MRI, X-rays, even doctor's notes, like anything I can get my hands on.
And then you were able to use that to start to query and help you in your longevity journey.
Exactly. And I use it all the time. And I'll ask it things like, what are the 5 doctors I need to make appointments with in the next 6 months and why? And then before the doctor's appointment, I'll say, can you output a dossier of my health history that I can give to the doctor? So they don't have to ask me questions. They'll have everything that exists. And when I've given it to doctors, they're like, holy shit, how did you get this? How can I have these for all my patients? And, and that's just obviously one, example of the power that this is going to really, deploy to so many people.
I love that story. And so you're like, wow, I created a personal health bot for myself using a custom GPT. And I'm guessing that you were like impressed with this idea of like a bunch of structured and unstructured data that's personal that you're going to put into this thing and then run it through an LLM so you could have a conversation with it and sort of talk to your data basically. Like, and then
exactly,
you had the aha of like, I should be doing that for my business. Now in the book, you told us about how you ended up with this really cool thing where you took transcripts of sales and account calls and effectively created like an algorithm and a scoring and an alert system for yourself to improve results and productivity out of your sales and account
That's
team.
correct.
Walk us through how you connected the dots. Did you go right to that, or did you have to
I did go right to that. So what I really tried to do when I talk to individuals that, I'm casually having lunch with over the weekend or big companies is try to simplify it all, right? And to simplify it, what I tell people was the same process I took on myself, which is there's really 3 steps. The first is identify the problem that you want to solve. The second is what data can help you solve that problem. And the third is what is the desired output? So what's the output or what's generated, so to speak, why it's called generative AI, generate something. What do you need this to generate that can help you solve the problem? You need to know those 3 things. And once you know those 3 things, you can really start to build in a way that's not really overwhelming. So obviously in the case of the health bot, problem I want to solve is stay alive as long as possible. The data is data about my body. The output is something I can use to talk to the data. So as time goes on and as I run into health issues or have questions, I'll have something for me. And I was able to create that. So in going to the case of, okay, how do I take this tool that can help me stay alive to creating a tool that can help my company stay alive and thrive, I use the same basic framework. The first and foremost is, what is the data that can help me solve the problem, right? I knew that what the problem was, which is so let me take a step back. I had to identify the problem for my company. And the problem I was finding with my company is I was hearing from my sales team and my customer success team that they were finding a hard time being efficient with their time. There's those nuggets of time they were spending each day with customers, but all the other stuff they felt like wasn't really moving the needle. So what I really want to figure out is what was all those other things, and can I help alleviate all those other things so they can be spending more and more time with customers, which would help me solve the problem of making sure my company continued to grow at scale. So then I took a step back and said, okay, well, what is the data that can help me essentially provide a tool to my team so they can be more efficient? So I start to ask a lot of questions. What is the pie chart of your day? To my team. What are you spending your time on? And they would say things like, it's really hard to find case studies. It's hard to write custom emails based upon what my clients need. It's hard to figure out what are the key trends and points of interest that my clients are going to want to talk about. And because I don't have that, I have to spend a lot of time researching versus spending time having more calls with customers. So I start to write all these things down. And then after I figured out what those unique problems were for my individual team, I really went on the hunt to figure out what the data I can uncover that can help maybe create some of these things. What those things are, I didn't quite know at that point, but essentially they were things that I could give to my team to help them not have to go find them themselves, if that makes sense. So for example, if a salesperson is jumping on a call with a food and beverage company that is in the innovation department, I want it to be easy for them to find case studies of things Suzy have done for other food and beverage companies in the innovation department, and have those case studies be output in a way that maybe redacted the specific customer information or was formatted in a certain way that they can easily drop into an email. So that's one of many examples. And after I kind of created a list of all these things, then again, I went on a hunt in terms of what is the data we can have that can help me generate these assets.
What's amazing about that story, Matt, is that you're a couple of things. One is you had that insight. You were like, okay, I've done this personal thing and now I'm going to apply it to my business. And you were pretty clear on like the 1, 2, 3 steps in your journey. You had this aha and you were like, I'm going to apply this to my own business. And then you went to your own executives and you're like, hey, I got this idea. Let's apply this in our own business. And can you talk a little bit about like how you got over that hump in your own company?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm the CEO of my company, and despite that, it still wasn't an easy path for me to be able to build an AI. And my takeaway from that is, if I'm the CEO of a mid-sized software startup and it wasn't easy for me, well, how are large companies going to do it?
What were some of the challenges you had, Matt?
So legal, data privacy, misunderstandings of the reality of today versus maybe where things were 6 months ago. So we all know AI.
Give me an example.
I will, yeah. So obviously I created this health GPT for myself. One of the first things I wanted to do was create a similar custom GPT for my sales team, where I can load in a bunch of data, which we'll get into in a second, and they can access it. And our lawyer's like, no way, you can't do this. Somebody at Samsung uploaded data and it got out there and they got fired and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, but they didn't use a custom GPT. They weren't on OpenAI's enterprise plan. Right now, uploading data there is no different than you having documents in the cloud, in a Google Drive. They're using the same encryption technology. No, you're wrong, blah, blah. And a lot of back and forth, at which point where I actually was going to bring in an outside law firm, not like they even knew, to validate it. Like, I had to fight my own legal team. Now they're just doing their job, but they probably read an article from 6 months ago prior, and it was before OpenAI launched enterprise. And I think you're going to keep seeing that happening, where there's going to be sort of these backdated concerns with knowledge that isn't true of today's capabilities. And because of that, companies aren't going to dive in. So ultimately, it's about fear and risk prevention that's going to stop companies. But the reality is the biggest risk is not doing anything at all. Like, I remember saying to them, like, I don't want to be the company with the best legal policy as I shut down the door, but I have stacks and stacks of great legal policy, right? And that's what's going to happen with a lot of companies. They're going to have great legal, but they're not going to have a business anymore.
Matt, I think that's really well said. I mean, we saw that, we just saw that play out with copyright. Like, it took the legal framework a while for copyright to come, and now, it turns out that when you create something with the LLMs, it is copyright protected.
That's right.
So, yeah. I remember you also, that was one problem you had with legal. Remember you also saying you had some problems either with your engineering, or there was some conflict that you couldn't get them which ultimately led
Well,
you to.
engineering is different because engineering isn't necessarily about them putting up walls. It's when you're an engineer and you're, you've been an engineer for 5, 10, 20 years, you have a way in your head of building things. And now all of a sudden they're being forced to relearn, almost like if we were being forced to talk or write or walk or you name it. These are things that are fundamental to your worldview of how you do your job. And I think what a lot of companies are struggling with is actually, what do you do? How do you retrain? How do you rebuild your engineering? Because then you have 3 kids that are AI natives that never knew the old world way of coding that are creating these incredible platforms. Like Cursor went from 0 to 100 million ARR, and I think like 6 months or some crazy number. We've never seen this before. And the reason they can do this is they don't need to go through the processes that were needed in the past to create software or technology. It doesn't exist anymore. So it's about, really reteaching yourself how to walk and talk when it comes to engineering. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially the larger you are as a company.
And did you encounter that within your own company as well as you?
100%. Listen, we have a great engineering team, but it's very hard to. And also, I don't. To be fair, I don't have a knowledge of, like, the reason I start to build tools for my sales and marketing team is because I'm not an engineer, so I don't even know how to get into my product to build for that. But so to build on the fringes in terms of how he operates, a different story. Now I'm learning more and more about that. But the reality is that they have their own realities in terms of the infrastructure the product is built on. So things that might seem easy to me for the outside, they're dealing with a lot of tech debt. And I think a lot of software companies are going to be faced with that. There's a reason that Mark Benioff saying, I'm going to create a completely new team for Agentforce, and we're going to build separately, because if he tried to force that into their existing Salesforce product infrastructure, it would take too long. And right now,
Yeah.
speed is so incredibly important in this world, because again, what you're competing with is 3 kids that can actually build things so fast because they don't have that tech debt.
So what was ultimately, you have these challenges. What's the best example of applied AI at Suzy? Like what's the thing that you're most proud of?
I mean, so there's a lot of things that we're doing. I think in terms of, again, it all comes back to the data, right? Because you first have to figure out what the problem you want to solve is, which a lot of people, frankly, don't even get there. They just want to dive in and start playing with tools. They never take a step back and say, what really am I trying to accomplish here? But putting that aside, after you figured it out, you need to find the right data. Because if you don't have the right data to help you solve the problem, you're going to get nowhere. It's all about data, right? So one thing I had uncovered, and you had kind of alluded to this earlier, is during COVID, we went remote as a company. We had 60 employees when COVID hit in March of 2020. And by the time it was like in the heat of COVID, July 2020, we had like 120 employees. And I was hiring people from all over the country. So like the cat was out of the bag. We were a remote company. I couldn't put it back in. And even today, we're a remote company. And because we were remote, and I think remote companies have a distinct benefit in the age of AI because all their data is in the cloud, right? Because you have to be if you're a remote company. So all of our data is in the cloud. We used a tool, by way of example, called Gong, which basically records every call. The customer's aware of it. It said this call is being recorded for quality assurance purposes. So every call we've had with existing customers, prospects, has been recorded since 2020. And by me digging in, what I was able to figure out is a way to essentially extract those transcripts of every call we've had one by one by one. And if you think about what is the blood test or MRI equivalent to a company, it's your customers and prospects speaking to your team in the wild, right? That's not canned information. That's during those calls, they're talking about the business topics that are important to them. They're talking about the product areas of interest. They're talking about your competitors. They're talking about macroeconomic factors. Maybe one call is not going to give you the full story, but we had over 25,000 hours of call transcripts. So I essentially took those call transcripts and I fed those into a model. And once that happened, it opened up the world to us, because essentially you have the voice of the industry, the customer, the market at your fingertips to build anything you want coming out of it. And on top of that data, we built a ton of tools that allow us to be smarter and make better decisions, whether it comes to our product roadmap, sales and marketing decisions, how to create content, even our SEO strategy. So we've created a whole new operating system off of what our customers are saying.
Two results I want to get from you. One is what do you attribute the increase in productivity as a result of AI, and also what do you attribute, how how's sales growth been as a result of these tools?
So our team is definitely more productive. It's not easy it's not like you're going to build these great tools and people are going to learn and train right away. It takes
Yep.
time. At the beginning, it's really about building a new way to work and training your team to say, well, no longer have to search through folders and documents to gain this information. You can just ask this tool for it and get it. I think the benefits that we've had through these tools is, one, we're all in the know. So being a remote company, it has benefits and it also has a lot of negatives to it. One of which is that you're not in the know. So if I want to know how a call went with an important customer or prospect, I used to be able to go to a salesperson, tap them on the shoulder and ask them. But now I have to set up a Zoom call with them or get in touch with them. But I don't now because I can actually talk to the call. I can say, what happened to the call between Joe Smith and Procter and Gamble? What was the client interested in? Blah, blah, blah. So being in a know, not only for like what happened during a call, but in aggregate, what's happening? What's the tenor or sentiment of our customer? How is it changing? What are the negative things they're increasingly saying? What are the things that they're asking for? And then we can actually act on that. It also allows more tactically our sales team to know, or our sales management to know, like if we lost deals, why? Because maybe the salesperson might not always remember or might not want to say it, right? But in aggregate, we can actually learn that information. If an existing customer is unhappy, we built a churn early warning signal where the head of our customer success is instantly notified if a customer is unhappy, so we can basically intervene and try to fix that. And in the past, that wouldn't have happened. Either the customer success person wouldn't have told their manager right away, or they would have forgotten. They would have moved on to the next thing, and they never would have told them. So those are examples of ways where we've learned about things and we've intervened and we've actually saved customers that otherwise wouldn't have otherwise been saved.
If you could give advice, Matt, I mean, based on all that journey you just described to us, you just already mentioned, identify the problem, identify the data, how do you what have you found as the most effective way to bridge the gap between your understanding of the power of Gen AI and where like 90% of people are, which is like, 2 clicks behind all of us that are sort of racing out ahead of the edge? How do you bridge that gap? What have you found to be the most effective?
Well, it really is just about a way of thinking. I think when you talk to people who are getting nowhere in AI, they'll say, oh yeah, I asked ChatGPT to get me a recipe and I played around with this tool and I play around with that tool, and they're just playing around. And if you're playing around, then it will not be important, right? And I think the way you approach it so you're not playing around is, again, really be methodical about what you're trying to accomplish. That's why I think the CEO needs to be involved. Because if you give it to the engineering team, a lot of engineering teams are really focused on building features or a product roadmap. And so for them, they're just going to think about how can I sprinkle some AI, magic dust on everything that we're doing. And that's what you're seeing a lot of companies do. It's like AI boosted functionality, but that's a lot different than why do we exist as a company? What can this new technology bring to our customers? And then what would the ideal output be? And then again, rebuild from the data and first principles and kind of go from there. That's the approach for everything. I don't mean to oversimplify it, but I think it's overcomplicated right now. People are so focused on the tools and the capabilities that they overlook what they're trying to achieve. And because of it, they never move the needle forward. Yeah. And I think we all have to take a step. And that's where the human comes in, right? Everyone's like, well, where's the human fitting in AI? And what are the skill sets that are needed in this new world? It's really about critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity, right? Yeah. And those are the elements that are needed at the beginning of going down any journey to actually be able to frame what you're trying to accomplish.
What's your best example? I totally love what you're saying. Like, if you don't have one, it's fine. What's your best example of you talking to CEOs? Because I think you're exactly right, that trust and respect you. Because, Matt, they know you've been around. Like, what's your best example of like the kinds of things you'll say to be like, stop playing around. You need to be involved. Like what's the best sort of thing you tell them to do or like think about?
Well, what the CEOs normally want me to do is give a keynote to their entire team. And then I'll do that. And then what will happen is their team, the rank and file, will reach out to me and say, what can I do? Blah, blah, blah. And I'll give them ideas. And then they're kind of stuck in the corporate vortex. So, I think that most CEOs aren't going to do what I do. Now, I don't run a Fortune 500 company, so it's different. Right. But I think that's really what it's going to take. I think it's going to take like you see what the guys from Google are doing, or what Mark Zuckerberg's doing, or even Benioff is doing. Like, you have to be in a level of detail to understand your business in a way that most people think is beneath them. And I think that's why a lot of these companies aren't going to reinvent, and they will go away. Like, we've seen it happen over and over and over again. Like, why did Circuit City not go away? Because they took too long to build a website, right? And it's like, why? And this is that times 1,000 in terms of the rate of change. So I am talking to CEOs. They're interested in hearing what I have to say, but I can't tell you honestly that many of them are changing how they spend their time. I mean, I'm spending 90% of my time essentially building. I'm building an AI myself. And I was never an engineer. I was a sales and marketing person prior. But that's what it really takes. You have to pivot basically what it means to be a professional and what your role means as a leader to really be able to drive change in an organization.
Matt, that's incredibly well said. I also love what you're saying. Makes me want to ask you about your perspective, because you said you're 50, you're worried about longevity, you're worried about your own longevity as well as longevity of your company. You started this in this interview. You started talking about sort of, you came into business in early 2000, and it was Facebook and social media, and then there was mobile, and now you're sort of, I mean, I think we're at the early stages of AI.
Oh yeah.
What's your perspective on where AI fits as it relates to social media and mobile and sort of these arcs, and how, is this the same? Is this bigger or smaller?
I mean, it encompasses all of them and eats it up and makes it like, it is so much bigger than all of that. I mean, social media was just a tool that was built on top of the web that allowed people to easily create and share content with one another. It was built on top of an existing platform. Mobile basically gave you a new modality that was much more convenient, essentially to access the digital world and digital information. This innovation makes us question what it means to be human. It is a completely different realm than it's like saying, what's the difference between breaking your leg or giving birth to a child? Like, it's at that level. I mean, the person that came to mind.
That's a good metaphor.
I don't know if it's the right metaphor, but it literally brings up existential questions to what it means, because for so long there were things that only humans could do that now technology can do, right? In the digital realm, it was essentially in digital revolution, it was taking what humans have already done and just making it more easily accessible, but didn't open up new realms. It didn't necessarily replace or augment or do better what humans do. So this now has to have us question, like, why does my job exist? Will it continue to exist? What should kids be learning in the early stage? What role do humans play versus technology play in everything?
Totally.
From writing to machinery to robotics? I mean, it is a completely different realm. And honestly, like, the biggest problem I've had in the last 2 years is sleeping, because I just feel like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and you just have to move so fast, because if not, you're going to really regret it. So it's made me be much more discerning about what I put on my calendar, the people who I meet with, what I do, because what I can do in an hour versus a bad lunch meeting now is 1,000x what I could do in the past in an hour, right? I can build a product in an hour. So now it's like, would I rather have a product in an hour or have lunch with this guy? And so it makes me rethink everything as a result.
Matt, what's been your biggest mistake in using or trying to get your business to utilize AI? What's been your biggest error as CEO?
Well, I think the biggest error we're all going to make is not acting fast enough and making hard decisions quickly enough. So,
and do you feel that yourself?
I always do. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a human element. There's the disruptive element. Like, I'm not going to share specific things about my business, but there are many companies out there that will have to make a decision. Do I walk away from 99% of my revenue to focus on the 1% of thing that's really going to still be relevant in the AI age? And I did that when I started Suzy. I took over a company that was about to go out of business, and we had 10 million in revenue, and I focused on the 5% rather of revenue that was in the consumer insights realm, and I pivoted to Suzy, right? And the reality is I didn't have a choice, because the company wasn't in a great financial position. I was able to pivot it. But I think those same questions are being asked right now across, especially companies in the technology space, but also in the creative or professional services space, et cetera, they really need to ask themselves, like, am I okay with walking away from what I have today to build what customers will want or need tomorrow? And what are the sacrifices we will need to make today? Whether it's my revenue is going to shrink by 50%, whether I have to shrink my workforce by 90%, hire completely new people, or just redefine what our company means. And many will just have death by 1,000 cuts and one day be like, where did our business go? They're going to get blockbustered, so to speak. But the blockbustering is not going to be over a period of 5 to 7 years. It's going to be over the period of maybe 1 to 3 years, maybe even 1 to 2 years, depending upon the industry. I had the good fortune of being able to go so deep into AI, as well as have sort of a broader view of culture and society through my work at Suzy, that I thought now 10 years after writing my last book, it made sense to write my next one. So I have a book coming out this May, 2025, called Generation AI. And it's about the impact of both the age of AI and Gen Alpha, which is right now a consumer cohort that are age 0 to 15, that's going to be the first truly AI generation, meaning they're never really going to know a world where AI doesn't exist. And what are the implications of the age of AI in this new cohort on every corner of society? So, I explore in the book relationships, parenting, the future of education, the future of career, entertainment, commerce, financial services, financial planning across the board, and really dive deep into what a future could look like in this new world.
I can't wait to read it. I mean, it's funny, to your point, Matt. You and I are similar in the sense of, I have a 8-year-old, and she's exactly to your point of your book. Because I'm into AI like you, and I'm sort of trying to sort of stay on top of these things. She gets exposed to it, and I kind of encourage it on some level, and so it's just amazing to see how she is more native, even more than me. Someone who's literally written a book and tried to study this. She's actually more able to grok, no pun intended, what the AI is capable of more than me. There's been multiple times where she'll be like, Dad, don't Google this. Ask AI about this. And I'll be like, AI is not going to give
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And she's been right. Like, she's been more right than I have.
Of course she has.
Yeah. And it's just like, so to your point, like, imagine when that generation is like, they're going to be completely comfortable, I'm guessing, with maybe not. Maybe there'll be a backlash, but the direction is more likely that they're just going to be completely comfortable and almost insist on like AI infusion into what.
Of course they are, because they're not going to know another way.
Right.
They're not going to, settle through the old way of doing things because they've never done that. It would be like us dialing a rotary telephone and it taking, 10 seconds to put each number in. That's basically going to be the way that they're going to be looking at the world.
Matt, I'm glad you remember the rotary
telephone.
Of
course.
Yeah.
Adam, do you just to sum things up, like what are your takeaways for what should consumer brands be taking, CEOs in particular, be taking away from Matt's story? What jumped out at you?
Well, a couple of things jumped out at me. One was, I loved Matt's point about like, think about a personal use so that you can sort of translate it to a business use. But I also loved those 3 things, Matt, about like, really, instead of just trying to play with it or try to just jump in and focus on the tools, like focus on your business, you said, and think about like, identify the problem. What's the data around that problem? What's your desired output? Like that was a great piece of advice. And then finally, I'd say that the next thing we mentioned, as a theme was speed. How fast the space is moving, how fast, I'll call it Gen Alpha and Gen Z, are going to be just insisting and comfortable with these tools, and that you can't, you as a CEO and as a business leader today, from what Matt was saying, you can't you can't overstate the speed with which things are moving. So like, you'll be talking to your team, you'll be talking to your lawyers, you'll be wanting to think about it, but in the meantime, the world's going to pass you by, and you'll get blockbustered or Circuit City'd if you're not careful.
Yep, 100%.
The one thing I would add to that jumped out, Matt, from what you said, which is totally consistent. You may have influenced us when we did our interview for our book, but we've had enough conversations ourselves with executives and CEOs. Your emphasis on the CEO has to be involved in and realizing
100%.
and driving the change. And your example of Mark Benioff, like, to me, it starts and ends with the CEO, and whether you're going to be blockbustered or not is up to the CEO, and whether you're actually going to take advantage of the opportunity
Absolutely.
that AI presents is really in front of all of the CEOs listening today. So
It really is.
I thought you really articulated, and you also, you embodied it, Matt. What had us ask you to be on the show again after writing the thing was really, we were inspired by hearing your story. So thanks for taking the time to come on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Big fan of what you guys are doing, and looking forward to seeing and hearing future episodes.
With that, we unfortunately have to draw it to a close. Thank you all for listening to AI First with Adam and Andy. For more resources on becoming AI First, go to our website. You can download case studies, join our email list, research briefings, etc. Our website, for those of you, it's www.forum3.com. A lot of amazing content there. And remember, you can't overinvest in AI learning. Onward.
Thanks all.